Hello, my name's Anne MacDonald, and today I'd like to talk to you about an approach to language teaching that I've developed over about 30 years. I've been teaching for over 40, and I first started to develop this about 30 years ago when I was introduced to systemic functional linguistics, Halliday's systemic functional linguistics, and then later to Charles Sanders Peirce. And the coming together of these created a mind shift for me, and it's resulted in teaching language as interaction. So this is the title of my talk, Teaching Language as Interaction. I want to explain what this approach is, and I want to focus on one aspect of this approach, which is English grammar as aspect and function. This is my elevator pitch for TLI, and I don't know if you'll understand it, but I hope you'll understand it by the end of the presentation. TLI is the how, the secondness, interaction of inducing learners to understand and express meaning, firstness, ideational, using specific text techniques, thirdness, textual. And as I said, for me, this was a mind shift away from the traditional approach view of language and approach to language teaching towards a view of language and teaching that is much more based on how language works to create real meaning in context. Now, the traditional approach, the problems with it are that it's based on the sentence and not on the text and the context. It's also based in tense and not aspect. It's based in past, present, and future. And it's also linear, as in time, and also as in the conception of how a text is organized or structured. For example, introduction, body, conclusion for writing. That's the same as saying beginning, middle, and end. And it really doesn't help the student very much. It doesn't tell them how to write the text. The traditional approach is also atomistic. It divides language up into bits. It teaches language items, but it doesn't teach the language as an integrated working whole. It's also ideational. It's focused mainly on ideas, and this is a kind of firstness. It's not focused on the how. The ideas are like the what, and it's not focused on the how. The ideational is like firstness, and the how is secondness, interaction. And it's also deductive, it's rule-based. So it's giving rules that the student has to follow rather than having the student work out their own patterns of language. And it's also instructional rather than interactional. The teacher instructs the students what to do, not how to do it. So the how is where TLI comes in. And Peirce talks about three realities. And Michael Halliday also talks about three metafunctions. And the theory goes from the very philosophical and very difficult through Halliday, who makes it more accessible for language and language teaching. And then TLI, which is further along the continuum towards the application of these theories to language teaching. So here we have Peirce and his firstness, secondness, and thirdness. This is a triadic relationship, and I've simplified the meanings a bit. Firstness is pure existence, as in a world of ideas. For example, it's like a painting in a gallery where the gallery is closed and no one can see it. So it's in isolation. And secondness is in interaction. So in the real world, it's like a painting when it's viewed and there's an interaction with the viewer. And when these two come together, they form a thirdness, which is a synthesis. And this is like when the viewer comes to a realization of what the painting means for them. Moving on to Halliday, again, a triadic model. The number 3 and the triangle are important. And Halliday's view of language is that it doesn't mean anything except in its context of use. And the context finds its way into the text via the ideational and the interactional. The ideational is like the world of ideas, in the real world, and the interactional is relationships. So again, things coming together, like the writer-reader relationship. And when these come together, creates the textual. And it's interesting that Halliday talks of the textual as resources of language that can integrate the ideational and the interactional. And these resources can be used for language teaching. And this is where TLI comes in this area here. I call it the zone of teacher-learner text interaction. So again, it's a three-way process. It's not just the teacher coming in and the learner interacting with the text techniques, but the text itself. This sounds odd, perhaps, but the text has a dynamic of its own, and it comes alive and interacts with the writer, with the reader, and with the teacher together. It almost forms itself, because systemic functional linguistics involves choice, and each choice is important. And if you choose one item, then that determines the kind of choices that you can make at other parts of the text in order to form a coherent whole within the context of that specific text. And another aspect of this view, Peircean view, is that it's iterative. It forms another firstness. So the essay could become then an idea that's not in consciousness, but then when the students perhaps interacts with it again, there will come another realization, another thirdness, and this leads to autonomy. So these techniques, they're not different to what are used at present in much of teaching, but I think that these are mainly used at the upper levels, the higher levels of proficiency, and I would argue that these should be used from the beginning, because they are what language is about and what language teaching should be about. So very similar techniques, resources, but the focus of TLI is different. The focus is on aspect, not intense, and on function, and also rhetorical structures. So it's a hierarchical view of text organization, not a linear one. This is from Mann and Thompson from Systemic Functional Linguistics. There's a reference at the end of the presentation. I don't have time for that today. So the focus is different, and in TLI, the focus is on the text, not on the sentence, the text and the context. It's also focused on aspect, viewpoint, feelings, bias. So the expression of the students' ideas through the text. The students, not just ideas, but ideas in the sense of the ideas filtered through them to provide viewpoint and to recognize bias. And of course, they'll have their own biases. So the hierarchical I've already dealt with, and it's also holistic. So the language is presented in the text and in its context. And it's also holistic in the sense that it fills the gap of how to do this. I think current teaching deals with the what, but not adequately with the how. It's also top-down, so it presents the overview and the students don't get lost in the detail. It's inductive rather than deductive, so the students are led to the realization of the patterns and the meanings in language. So that this is more empowering for them, and it's critical. So it's based in text analysis, and students are encouraged to criticize the language and also the ideas, and it's interactional. So this is important for the teaching and also for the development of the sense that it's an interaction of parts within the text itself, and also the text with the real world, with the people who will deal with it, will read it, or otherwise deal with the text. So, and here I want to show how the current view of language grammar as tense doesn't make much sense, and it's not very useful, really. This is a typical presentation of grammar. I go to the shops today, I went to the shops yesterday, I will go to the shops tomorrow. So it's based on time. Aspect is added, but again, it's usually connected to time. I'm going now, I have been going, or I've been going for 2 years. Time again. And aspect, in a sense, used by PLI to mean the expression of emotions and feelings and viewpoint, opinions, comes later, but at the higher levels. And I would argue that this is too late, that it should come at the beginning, because this is what language is really all about and what teaching should be about. And to try and prove that point, I'll just show this short scripted dialogue. It's natural English, although it's scripted, it's fairly natural. And it's a negotiation to see who will go to the shops. And I've highlighted all the instances of tense. And there are 13 instances. And from this, from a functional viewpoint, you can see that only 3 of them have the tense doing what it's supposed to do, doing its job. Past tense for past reference here, present for present here, and present for present here. All the rest of them have either present tense for future, or also future tense for the present. And this is only 3 out of 13, which is 23%, leaving 77% of the examples where the tense does not relate to the time. And even in these 3 examples, it could be argued that the aspect and the viewpoint actually is more important than the time. So let's summarize features and benefits of TLI. I've already mentioned some. Interactional awareness of language and context is developed because of the interacting with the text and also with its context. Holistic, top-down, develops confidence and autonomy. It's inductive, it develops thinking, it encourages the students to think of the patterns, and this in turn develops confidence and autonomy also. It's hierarchical, which helps with the organization of ideas and with actual thinking. Focus on relations builds a sense of cohesion, how the text connects together, and also of the function of the text. And aspect and viewpoint focus, this develops critical thinking and flexibility. So the same language item can have very different meanings depending on their specific context of use, and so different viewpoints, and so students need to be more flexible, and this is very useful for them in saying kind of implicit meaning, implied meaning, and understanding what people mean by what they say or write, and not just what they say or write. And focus on function develops the idea of language as action. So this means that students are empowered, they can use the language for their own purposes. And all of this leads to empowerment and also to autonomy. The idea is that students will, after a short time, move on, they'll know how to use these techniques, and they will apply them in their own learning. Back to the elevator pitch. Perhaps you'll understand it better now, I hope so. So TLI is the how, the second is interaction of inducing learners to understand and express meaning, firstness ideational, using specific language techniques, thirdness textual. And as I said, this was a complete mind shift for me, away from the traditional and towards an understanding of language as used in real life context, and it's one that works for teaching. Here are some references and other sources, and if you would like to get in touch with me, if you have any ideas or questions, then I'd be very happy to interact with you on those. Thank you very much. I hope you have learned. I've spent a long time developing this, so I hope you learned something. And thank you for listening. Thank you. Bye-bye.